Tonight, the latest developments demand your full attention. And once you hear this, you'll understand why. Prince Harry is currently in the United Kingdom for a privacy trial against Associated Newspapers, the publisher of the Daily Mail. What's emerging from this courtroom is nothing short of explosive. We're talking about allegations that cut to the very heart of how royal news gets reported, who controls the narrative, and what happens when journalists themselves become part of the story they're supposed to be covering. But before we dive deeper into what's really happening here, I need you to do something for me. If you're finding this information valuable, if you want to stay informed about what the mainstream media won't tell you, hit that subscribe button right now. It's completely free, takes just 1 second, and it's the best way to make sure you don't miss any of these crucial updates. And here's a question I want you to think about as we go through this. Do you believe that journalists who become part of the story should still be allowed to report on it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is a debate that goes far beyond just royal reporting. Now let's get into what's actually happening. The trial itself involves Prince Harry and 6 other individuals who are suing Associated Newspapers over alleged illegal news gathering activities. These aren't minor accusations we're talking about. The claimants have alleged that journalists engaged in unlawful methods to obtain private information. And here's where it gets interesting. 2 of the Daily Mail's most prominent royal correspondents, Rebecca English and Charlotte Griffiths, are directly named in Harry's allegations. Rebecca English, for those who might not be familiar, is one of the most senior royal correspondents in the British media. She's been covering the royal family for years, appearing regularly on the Daily Mail's Palace Confidential show, which has become a go-to source for royal news and commentary. Charlotte Griffiths, now the editor-at-large for the Mail on Sunday, has similarly built her career on royal reporting. These are not minor players. These are the stars of royal journalism in Britain. So what exactly is Harry alleging? Well, one of the most striking claims involves an email that Rebecca English allegedly sent regarding Chelsea Davy, one of Harry's former girlfriends. According to evidence presented in court, there was communication about trying to locate Chelsea Davy's seat on a British Airways flight. Now think about that for a moment. We're talking about someone attempting to find out where a private individual is sitting on an airplane. The implications of that are genuinely disturbing. What reason could there possibly be for needing that information other than to facilitate some form of intrusive journalism or harassment? When confronted with this email in the context of the trial, Rebecca English's response was that she doesn't remember sending it. But here's the problem with that defense. The email exists. It's been presented as evidence. It only came to light because it was revealed during discovery for another case involving the Sun newspaper. So we're not talking about hearsay or speculation. There's documented evidence of this communication. Now let's talk about Charlotte Griffiths and what might be an even more peculiar situation. According to testimony in the trial, Harry and Charlotte Griffiths exchanged phone numbers at some point. Harry's version of events is that this exchange happened at a party that they met just once at a weekend gathering, and crucially that he had no idea at the time that she was a journalist. He claims he gave her his number without knowing her profession. Stop and think about the implications here. If Harry's account is accurate, then we have a journalist who met a member of the royal family in a social setting and didn't disclose her profession. What was the nature of that interaction? Was it romantic, as some have speculated? If Harry thought he was giving his number to someone for personal reasons, not knowing she worked for a newspaper, what does that say about the ethics of how that contact information might have subsequently been used? But Charlotte Griffiths has her own account of their connection. She claims that she was in contact with someone on Facebook who went by the name Mr. Mischief, and that she believed this person to be Harry. Harry, for his part, flatly denies ever using that name or having any such Facebook interaction. So we have directly contradictory claims. One of these versions has to be false. The question is, which one? And more importantly, can Charlotte Griffiths provide evidence of these Facebook messages? If they exist, they would be crucial pieces of evidence that could either support her account or, if they don't exist or don't match her description, raise serious questions about the credibility of her reporting over the years. This brings us to what might be the most troubling aspect of this entire situation: how the Daily Mail itself has chosen to handle the story. You would think that when your own journalists are named in a major court case involving allegations of illegal news gathering, that would be newsworthy, right? You'd expect some acknowledgement, some transparency about the situation. Instead, what we've seen is something quite different. The Daily Mail's Palace Confidential show, which normally features both Rebecca English and Charlotte Griffiths as regular panelists, aired an episode this week while the trial was ongoing, but neither Rebecca nor Charlotte appeared in the studio. The host began the show by introducing two people named Richard, both senior editors at the paper, and then made a passing comment about Rebecca English being absent because she was in Bristol covering Prince William. For the superfans of Rebecca, the host said with a kind of forced cheerfulness, she's not in the studio, but she's sending video reports. What wasn't mentioned? The fact that Rebecca English is one of the central figures in a major court case against the newspaper. What wasn't discussed? The specific allegations that Harry has made about her conduct. The show then proceeded to read a carefully worded statement about the trial that made no reference whatsoever to the involvement of their own journalists. It was sterile, it was sanitized, and it was, frankly, Orwellian in its omission of the most relevant facts. After reading this legal statement that said nothing of substance, the show then cut to a pre-recorded video report from Rebecca English about Prince William's activities. There she was, reporting on royal engagements as if nothing unusual was happening, as if she wasn't at that very moment a key figure in litigation against her own employer. The disconnect is staggering. How is a viewer supposed to trust reporting from someone who is actively involved in a legal case about the very methods used to gather royal news? The same applies to Charlotte Griffiths, who wasn't mentioned at all in the episode despite being equally implicated in the allegations. There was no explanation for her absence, no acknowledgement of the awkward position the show and the newspaper found themselves in. It was as if by simply not mentioning the elephant in the room, they could make it disappear. This approach raises fundamental questions about journalistic ethics and transparency. If a reporter becomes part of the story, if a reporter is accused of potentially unlawful conduct in gathering news, can they continue to report on that same subject matter as if nothing has changed? Can their reporting be considered objective or trustworthy under those circumstances? Most people would say no. At the very least, there should be disclosure. There should be acknowledgement that these journalists have a personal stake in the outcome of this trial. Instead, we get this bizarre dance where everyone pretends everything is normal. Rebecca is just covering William because that's her job. Charlotte just happens to not be available this week. Nothing to see here, folks. But people aren't stupid. Royal news enthusiasts, the very audience that watches Palace Confidential religiously, know exactly what's happening. They're following the trial. They're reading about the allegations. They can see that Rebecca and Charlotte are named in the case. The attempt to pretend otherwise doesn't make the newspaper look professional or careful. It makes them look like they're engaged in a cover-up. And here's where this gets even more complicated. In recent months, Charlotte Griffiths' reporting on Harry and Meghan has noticeably shifted in tone. She's been writing more favorable pieces about the couple, stories that paint them in a more positive light than we've seen from her in the past. Now, why might that be? One theory that's been suggested is that perhaps she was hoping for a softer treatment in court. Maybe she thought that if she showed she could be fair to Harry and Meghan, that Harry might go easier on her when it came to testimony and allegations. If that was the strategy, it clearly didn't work. Harry showed no mercy in his testimony. He made his allegations clearly and didn't pull punches. But the very fact that we have to speculate about whether a journalist's coverage might be influenced by their involvement in litigation shows how compromised the situation has become. We should be able to trust that royal reporting is based on facts, on legitimate sources, on proper journalistic methods. We shouldn't have to wonder whether a reporter is writing positive stories as a legal strategy. Now let's address what actually happened in the courtroom this week, because Harry's testimony revealed quite a bit about his perspective on all of this. When questioned about his relationship with Rebecca English, Harry was unequivocal. He stated that he did not have a good relationship with her. In fact, he said quite the opposite. He suggested that any polite interactions he might have had with her were likely because he was advised to maintain a civil relationship with royal correspondents, not because there was genuine warmth or trust there. Harry described feeling that he had been forced to work with these journalists, to maintain some kind of relationship with them, all while knowing the types of stories they were writing about him and how they had, in his words, commercialized his private life. This gets to the heart of what Harry sees as the fundamental injustice. He was a child, a teenager, a young man who had no say in how his life was portrayed, no control over what information about him was published, and no real recourse when that information was obtained through questionable means. When asked why he didn't complain directly to Rebecca English about articles that he found objectionable, Harry's response was telling. He said, "Hindsight is a beautiful thing. It's a recognition that at the time, as a younger man still finding his way, still trying to navigate the bizarre world of being a public figure from birth, he didn't know how to push back effectively. Or perhaps he did complain through official channels and nothing changed. Either way, his answer suggests a sense of powerlessness that he clearly found frustrating and that still resonates with him today. Regarding Charlotte Griffiths and the phone number exchange, Harry's testimony was similarly direct. He insisted he had no idea she was a journalist when they met. He claimed they met just once, at a party, and that his social circles at the time were not leaky. He wanted to make it absolutely clear, he said, that people in his circle knew how to keep things private. The implication is obvious. If Charlotte Griffiths was able to gain access to private information about Harry, it wasn't because his friends were talking to her. So where was that information coming from? Harry also firmly denied ever using the name Mr. Mischief on Facebook or any other platform. He stated he didn't believe he had ever been to Ibiza except with his now wife Meghan, contradicting suggestions that he might have met Charlotte Griffiths there. These are specific, verifiable claims. If Charlotte can produce Facebook messages from someone calling himself Mr. Mischief, and if she can demonstrate that this person was indeed Harry, that would be significant evidence. If she can't, then we have to ask what the basis was for her believing she was in contact with him, and whether any reporting she did based on that belief was reliable. What makes this entire situation even more troubling is the broader context of how Harry's life has been commercialized from childhood. He described in his testimony the experience of having his life commodified without his consent, of being turned into a product that newspapers could sell. Every private moment, every relationship, every mistake was potential content for tabloid stories, and he had no control over any of it. As a minor, he couldn't consent to this exposure. Even as an adult, the machinery of royal reporting was so entrenched, the appetite for stories about him so voracious, that stepping away from it seemed nearly impossible. There's a painful irony here that hasn't gone unnoticed. Harry is in court arguing passionately about how damaging it was for him to be commercialized as a child without his consent. He's describing the trauma of having photographers follow his girlfriends, of having his teenage years dissected in newspapers, of never having a truly private moment, and yet his own children, Archie and Lilibet, are now regularly featured on their parents' social media. Just as Harry was preparing to fly to the United Kingdom for this trial, Meghan posted a series of photos and videos of the children at a zoo and swimming in a pool. Now, defenders would say that there's a difference. Harry and Meghan control what images are released. They choose when and how their children appear publicly. But critics, and there are many, argue that this misses the point entirely. Archie and Lilibet cannot meaningfully consent to having their images shared with millions of people around the world. At their ages, they can't understand what it means to be public figures or how those images might affect them as they grow older. So while Harry may argue that he's protecting his children by controlling the narrative, others see it as a different form of the same commercialization he claims damaged him. These aren't formal, carefully staged portraits taken for a specific occasion. Many of these images show the children in casual private moments, running around in pajamas, playing at home, swimming. These are the kinds of intimate family moments that most people keep in personal photo albums, not broadcast to the world. And while Meghan may partially obscure their faces or show them in profile, it's not hard to piece together what these children look like. The information is out there. The images are public. In what meaningful way is this protecting them? When Harry and Meghan were involved with the Parents Network, a charity focused on protecting children online, this contradiction became even more stark. How can you credibly advocate for children's online safety while regularly posting images of your own children on social media? How can you warn about the dangers of digital exposure while actively exposing your own kids to exactly that? Some observers have speculated that this fundamental conflict may have been part of the reason Harry and Meghan ultimately stepped back from that charity work. It's hard to be the face of a campaign about protecting kids online when you're constantly uploading pictures of your own children to Instagram. The comparison to how other royal parents handle this issue is instructive. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, for example, allowed their children to choose for themselves when they turned 18 whether they wanted royal titles and the public exposure that comes with them. Both Lady Louise and James, Earl of Wessex, decided they did not want to be known as Prince and Princess, even though they were entitled to those titles. They were given agency over their own lives in a way that Harry never was. And Harry and Meghan, despite all their talk about protecting their children, have done the opposite. They've given Archie and Lilibet Prince and Princess titles, ensuring that they will be seen as significant royal figures, all while living in a country that has no monarchy and where those titles mean nothing legally but everything in terms of public perception. This all circles back to credibility and trust, which is really what's at stake in this trial. Can we trust royal reporting when the reporters themselves are implicated in the very practices they're covering? Can we trust Harry's testimony when his own treatment of his children seems to contradict the principles he's fighting for in court? Can we trust newspapers that refuse to transparently address allegations against their own staff? The Daily Mail's attempt to simply ignore the elephant in the room is not going to work in today's media environment. We live in a world where information spreads quickly, where people can access court documents and testimony directly, where social media allows for instant discussion and analysis of events as they unfold. You can't just not mention that your star royal correspondents are named in a major lawsuit and expect people not to notice. You can't keep trotting them out to report on the royal family as if nothing has changed and expect audiences to accept that without question. If Rebecca English and Charlotte Griffiths have done nothing wrong, if they've gathered their information through legitimate means and have nothing to hide, then the answer is simple. Be transparent about it. Explain what happened. Provide context for the allegations. Show the evidence that supports your version of events. This is a civil trial, not a criminal proceeding. There's no legal prohibition on discussing it. The only reason to stay silent is if you have something to hide, or if you're worried that your explanations won't hold up to scrutiny. The question about the British Airways email regarding Chelsea Davies' seat is particularly troubling because there's documentary evidence. The email exists. It was sent. So saying, "I don't remember sending it," isn't really a defense. The question is, why was that email sent? What was the purpose of trying to locate where Harry's girlfriend was sitting on a plane? What kind of story could possibly justify that level of intrusion into someone's travel plans? These are questions that deserve answers, and the silence from the Daily Mail is deafening. Similarly, with Charlotte Griffiths and the phone number exchange, if she has records of Facebook messages from someone calling themselves Mr. Mischief, those should be easy to produce. Screenshots would resolve this question immediately. If she doesn't have those messages, or if they don't actually show what she's claimed they show, then that's a serious problem for her credibility. And if it was a romantic connection, as some have speculated given that Harry gave her his number without supposedly knowing she was a journalist, then that's information that absolutely should have been disclosed in any subsequent reporting she did about him. You can't have a personal relationship with someone and then report on them without acknowledging that connection. The mainstream media has long operated on a certain set of assumptions about credibility and authority. People trusted newspapers because they were supposed to have editorial standards, fact-checking processes, ethical guidelines about how information should be gathered and reported. But incidents like this erode that trust. When newspapers appear to be covering up for their own staff, when they refuse to address legitimate questions about their reporting methods, when they keep using reporters who are themselves part of the story, it makes people wonder what else they're not being told. This is not about taking Harry's side or the newspaper's side. This is about transparency and accountability. If you're a news organization, you should be able to withstand scrutiny of your own practices. You should be able to explain how you gather information and why you believe your methods are ethical and legal. And when your staff members are accused of wrongdoing, you should address those accusations head on, not pretend they don't exist. The irony is that by trying to sweep this under the rug, by keeping Rebecca English and Charlotte Griffiths off camera and not mentioning their involvement in the trial, the Daily Mail is actually drawing more attention to the issue. People notice omissions. They notice when something that should be discussed isn't being discussed, and they draw their own conclusions about why that might be. What this trial is really exposing is a system that has been broken for a long time. Royal reporting in Britain has always existed in a strange gray area where access and information are traded, where relationships between the palace and the press are complex and often mutually beneficial, and where the line between legitimate journalism and intrusive harassment has never been clearly defined. Harry is trying to force a reckoning with that system. He's trying to draw lines and say certain practices are not acceptable no matter how long they've been going on. Whether he'll succeed is another question entirely. The British press is powerful and they're not going to give up their access and their methods without a fight. But what Harry has succeeded in doing is bringing attention to practices that many people find disturbing. The idea that journalists would try to track flight seating, that they would form personal relationships without disclosing their profession, that they would potentially use illegal means to gather information. These are things that should concern anyone who cares about privacy and ethical journalism. As this trial continues, we're likely to hear more revelations, more allegations, more contradictory accounts of what happened and when. Charlotte Griffiths is expected to give evidence, which means we may finally get answers to some of these questions about phone numbers and Facebook messages. Rebecca English may also testify, giving her a chance to explain the circumstances around that email about Chelsea Davies' seat. These moments will be crucial in determining not just the outcome of the case, but the credibility of everyone involved. What's clear already is that the old way of doing things, where royal correspondents operated in a cozy relationship with their subjects and with their sources, where questionable practices were overlooked as long as they produced good stories, where accountability was minimal and transparency was non-existent, that era is coming to an end. People demand more now. They want to know how information is gathered. They want journalists to be held to ethical standards, and they want honesty when things go wrong. The Daily Mail's Palace Confidential trying to carry on as if nothing unusual is happening would be almost comical if it weren't so serious. These are major allegations involving potentially illegal conduct. They deserve serious examination and discussion. By refusing to engage with the substance of the claims, by keeping their own journalists out of the studio and off camera, by reading sanitized legal statements that omit the most important details, the newspaper is not protecting its reputation, it's damaging it further. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you one more time. If you found this information valuable, if you want to stay informed about developments that the mainstream media might not fully cover, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any updates. This story is far from over, and there will be more revelations coming out of this trial in the days and weeks ahead. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Harry has a valid point about how the media treated him? Or do you think he's being hypocritical given how he and Meghan handle their own children's exposure? What do you make of the Daily Mail's handling of the allegations against their own journalists? These are important questions, and your perspective matters. So take a moment, leave a comment below, and let's have a real conversation about what all of this means for journalism, for privacy, and for accountability. This is about more than just royal gossip. This is about fundamental questions of ethics and trust that affect how we all consume news and information.